right, I'm going to go ahead and get this thing started just to make sure that we're respecting everybody's time. Welcome. This is Bringing the Backstory, and my name is Adam Ross. I own and author First Fantasy Books, which is a series of leveled readers in the fantasy genre for beginning readers. Go ahead and let these gentlemen introduce themselves.
Sure. I'm Danger Slater. I write weird horror books. I have 8 currently published. This is my newest one. It's called New Fellows, and I'm from Portland, so I didn't have to go very far to come here.
Hi. I'm Nicholas Robinson, and I'm going to use the mic because my voice is just fucking hash today. I am a horror author. I live just north of Vancouver, so it wasn't much of a trip here for me either. Been writing for 12 years, somewhere in there. 6 books out.
So we're all local. I'm from Boring, Oregon. So we're all fairly local here. It's exciting. Just kind of a quick show of hands. How many people in here are like writers, are here for writing? Okay. Is there anybody in here that's for cosplay? Excellent. And our tabletop RPGs? Awesome. Fantastic. That just kind of gives me kind of a guide on which directions we want to hit and touch on throughout this conversation. And how, questions I might want to ask. So, as sort of the person leading this discussion, I'll go ahead and start with, for you and building your books, do you find it that you tend to come up with the story idea and then build the backstories in around the characters within what you want to accomplish? Or do you tend to have an idea for a character, build their backstory, and then have the story come out of that?
It's really weird to answer this because when I'm plotting out a book or a story, it's kind of a chaotic thing of I will jot down every idea I have as far as places I want things to happen in, any sort of plot point that is going to happen, any character archetype, like, oh, this person is the father or whatever, and then character names to break it down even more, and then start breaking down the traits for them. So I do all of it in a kind of a whirlwind, basically week or two. If I'm going to write a book, I take about 2 weeks of just doing that, of just all note-taking, essentially, before I actually start writing a single word. So a lot of it doesn't get used, but the idea, I believe, for me is to get as much out as possible and then figure out what character traits and what actual characters that I've come up with fit the story that I want to make or I came up with. So it's kind of like you're doing them at the same time, essentially.
Yeah, it's not all that dissimilar for me. Like, once I have kind of a character archetype put together, I pick their name based on what role they play in some small part in the story. I'll use like a baby generator type thing, and figure out name meanings and culture and go from there. Kind of build the character's backstory as I'm doing that, and then location, history, things along those lines. It's all kind of done as one big jumble.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. From my standpoint, where I've got these leveled readers that I'm working with, I actually started with the idea at level 3 in the reading process, and so then it became, all right, so why is this character making this decision in this book at the 3rd level of developmentally reading, and I'm going to have to add something in their background in the level 2 books that's going to address why they would make that decision, like build that part of their character. And I've got a young adult teen novel that I'm writing now. It's like, okay, well, how did they get this way from level 2 to now young adult? Like, there's things that are going to have to happen, traumatic experiences and positive experiences in the meantime that develop that character. So I definitely see what you're saying. Like, sometimes as you're writing, aspects come up and you're like, well, why did they do that? So that's really an interesting perspective. Do you guys do any like RPGs or anything like that? Do you guys play any of the tabletop games and stuff?
I have been known to, and I it isn't really public yet, but I wrote backstory and a bunch of story elements to an RPG that's going to be coming out, both video game and tabletop formats. So.
And when doing that, how important do you feel creating the backstory is to the way that you play? So as opposed to writing, how important is the backstory and your character to how you play?
To some extent, it's a little bit less so in that, just because of the fact that you're basically filling a hole inside of a narrative with the RPG versus having to actually fill out that hole when you're writing a book.
Yeah.
I mean, it has different complications because you have to have this whole empty space there in the center, which is where whoever the player happens to be is going to fit in, and what their character is going to have to fit. So it's guys' own separate challenges.
Yeah. And we kind of touched on this, but I would like to kind of go in deeper. Like, what are some of the major elements that you think are important to building a backstory to having sort of a well-rounded character? What are some of the main elements that you look for?
Consistency. Like, knowing who that person is and keeping it consistent is really important.
Yeah, and I would say like relatability too. Even bad guys need to be relatable to some degree. Maybe not sympathetic, but you need to understand why their thought processes are bringing them to their decisions. So even if you're not in agreement with the bad guy, which you probably shouldn't be, you go, yeah, I get it. You know, that's why I think that's why people like Thanos in the MCU movies. They're like, I get his methods are wrong, but I get what he's getting at. You know?
Except for like Killmonger, I completely agreed with him. I thought he was completely right.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say I saw this thing where it was like, you can't have a villain without a backstory because there's no reason for them to become a villain.
Yeah.
It's just a bad person.
Oh, there's a question.
The rebuttal to that is the classic Disney villains who are just evil and their backstory absolutely doesn't matter because it's not relevant.
That's like the Lord of the Rings thing where everything is black and white. There is no gray.
Lord of the Rings did have a complicated backstory. The original Maleficent did not. She was still a good villain. She was just evil.
I think
They went back and, kind of revisited that, right? So now you're getting the Maleficent movie where they kind of go into, okay, originally when they did Snow White in 1937 or whatever it was, like she was just a bad guy. That's the way that a lot of the writing was back then. That's why Lord of the Rings, right? 1937. It didn't have as much, they were writing in a very black and white, good and evil type way. But now they're starting to realize we want something juicier, we want more story, and it make those characters more complex. And so then they come out with the Maleficent movie where now there's a lot more backstory as to what caused her or led her down that direction. And then I think going back and then rewatching the original Snow White with this new content can really change how you see the movie and how you relate to it. Yeah.
So one villain that I can think of that doesn't have much in the way of backstory is Umbridge from Harry Potter, who is almost intentionally supposed to feel like it's like in comparison to Voldemort. Voldemort has a very clear backstory, and therefore is very important to the overall arcing storyline. Whereas Umbridge is a villain that's mostly in book 5, I believe, right?
Shows back up in book 7.
A little bit, yeah.
Well, she's classified as a villain because of the media she's in, but she's really just a bad person. And there can be a difference between being a bad person and being a villain.
And I think that's another thing to take a look at is with with Harry Potter, as Voldemort is clearly the villain, but people can be obstacles too. And I think Umbridge might qualify as one of those obstacles, and so that's why there's not a lot of backstory there, is because she's really more of an obstacle in the story rather than a full, fleshed-out villain. And that kind of is where backstory can come in, all right? Backstory, when you have a main villain, the reader's going to want to relate to it on some level. And Yeah,
well, I was just going to say, as a creator or a writer or a gamer or anybody who's making up a character, I don't think you should strive to be like, they're just an evil thing. Like,
right.
if you have the ability to decide these things, you should try to make them feel like real characters, just because it works sometimes for them to be just this unstoppable evil force that, you know, is there so the hero can go through their hero's journey fighting something bigger than them. That's fine, but if you can do something about it, you probably should.
And piggybacking off of that, similarly, what about in terms of a hero character? How important is it for you when you're writing their backstory to have some sort of character flaw or something along those lines where it's like they're not just a purely good person, there's something in there that makes them, I don't know, more human?
I mean, that goes back to like the Greek storytelling. Like there's always all the gods have single flaws, right? They all have one thing that's wrong with them that kind of, you know, their Achilles heel. Literally, Achilles has his Achilles heel.
But that was more of a physical weakness,
Yeah.
right? What about like a kind of a character flaw? Like, you know, as a reader, myself, obviously we're here as writers because we all love to read. But in terms of your experience as a writer, when you're writing out a character, or as a reader when you're reading a character, how important is it for you to be able to see them mess up? And just to go like, oh, yeah, I've done that myself. Like, yeah.
All of my characters are psychologically damaged in some way. I mean, from the beginning. I mean, I don't know how to write anyone who isn't psychologically damaged.
There's a real easy way to kind of, it doesn't have to be super complicated. All your character needs is to think they know the answer and be wrong.
Yeah.
And then learn that they're wrong and then adjust their behavior from there. That is now a character arc.
Or not adjust their behavior.
Or not adjust their behavior, yes. Something needs to happen when they learn that they don't know what they think they know.
I want to get some new hands here, yeah.
First off, thank you guys so much for your time, for being here. And this question is to all three of you. We know the character is king here, but I'd love to hear what your creative process is for world building.
For world building? Ooh.
It depends on what we're looking at here. A lot of what I do, it takes place in the world that we live in. So I just find areas of it and distort it from what it really is. But at the same time, I mean, I've got this massive fantasy realm that I've been working with for a while now that I haven't put anything out. But I was a double major in physics and chemistry when I went to college. So I like going at things with kind of an analytical, scientific background. So I have fun with some of that stuff and kind of build from there. But
I think it depends, too, what type of book or thing that you're trying to create.
Yeah.
An epic fantasy series is going to have a much larger built-out world with a lot more details because the readers of those things want that kind of stuff. And, I would assume the writers want to talk about those kind of things, too. But I don't know if you can see how thin my novella is here. Building out the world is not necessarily something that I think is... Building it out in insane detail is not my focus a lot of the time. It's more about the characters and the world experienced from them. So you see from the perspective of the characters moving through it, even though this is not the world that we live in, it is very experiential of the characters in the book instead of this thing that's outside of them.
Can I get a time check real quick?
Oh,
Time check.
sure.
Okay, so we got 20 minutes left. All right, not that I'm going to go 20 minutes long on this answer, but I just wanted to make sure that we were doing good on time. So for me, it depends on where I'm going with it. If I'm going with my books, I'm starting small because I'm starting with basic beginner readers. And then I'm going to build up to teen novels where the world is going to be much more complex. But because I'm starting with beginner readers, they need very specific, very basic stuff to then develop the lexicon, develop the reading process to get to the bigger stuff. When I'm doing something like a homebrew tabletop RPG campaign, I work in fantasy because then I can mess with stuff, right? It doesn't have to follow the rules of physics because it's fantasy. And so when I'm doing a tabletop RPG, realistically, I build everything out. I start from the world. This is what it looks like physically. and then I will build down, like, okay, here's the different continents, here's the weather patterns, here's, you know, the local government in this area, here's the local government in this area, and I will literally build it down so that when my player characters decide to do something, I at least have a foundation to operate from as the game master. So it really depends on kind of your personal processes, I think. It also deals with the genre that you're in. If I'm writing something in 1927 New York City, I better know something about 1927 New York City. Because
right.
otherwise, somebody who's a historian is going to write a blog post about it and destroy me. So it just really depends on kind of what you're doing, and then research is always key. You know, even in fantasy, somebody's going to go, "That's not the way polearms work." It's fine. It's fantasy, but there's always going to be that person. So just kind of knowing your direction and your process and what you're trying to accomplish with it in terms of world building. Yeah.
So earlier you were in the Hope panel, and we talked about how when you're writing you can't really plan things, because if you plan things out you're just gonna stop writing that. And I was wondering, is world building the same for you?
No, world building works a little bit differently. It's once I actually have a structure for the story, I just stop. I lose interest in writing it, because I've got a skeleton there and I don't really want to play with it anymore. So, but world building works out very differently because that's more of a thought experiment. It's something that's kind of just fun. Whereas writing isn't necessarily fun. I mean, it is, but I mean, you have to agree. Writing it's work.
Emotional work, yes.
It can become tedious.
Yeah, so creating like an outline and working on that outline, once I have an outline in front of me, I no longer want to write it. I just want to walk away from it and give up. So.
And that also is another one of those things. It kind of depends on your writing style. You know, for me, I like having kind of this world that people operate in, some general like skeleton pieces, and then as I'm writing, like I have this cartoon playing in my head, and I'm this third-party observer, and I'm writing what I see.
Yeah.
And then something will happen, and that's when I go, oh, why did they do that? And then I have to fill in that part of the backstory. But I've got this world, this general world that they're playing in. And how those characters interact with it. I've several of my books. I said, okay, this is what's going to happen in this book. And then as I'm sitting there writing it, the character makes a decision in the book, and I go, oh, well, that changes things. And now I've got a whole different story that I'm getting ready to tell. And that other story that I started on, that's now getting pushed a book back because of this growth process that the character has to go through to get to that point. Has changed its trajectory. Similar with tabletop RPGs, everybody says, you know, that you go into a game as a game master, you've got a plan, and then your players sit down at the table and change everything. So for me, my characters often do that with my writing style. Other people are more structured, and that's totally fine. It really has to do with how you process things. Yeah.
You mentioned inspiration from like Westerns and stuff.
Yeah.
When you're watching those like Clint Eastwood movies and all that stuff, how do you avoid making a stereotype character who is just like, you know, you've seen them 100 times before, and like how do you add flavor to that character?
Well, you're probably going to start with a stereotype because you need them to, you know, there are certain things that people who watch Westerns expect to happen. Stranger comes to town, you know, there's a shady sheriff or something. Like, these are things that you see in every single one of these movies. Yeah. But it comes down to a lot of what we were saying about that kind of empathy and getting into the character's head and understanding where they come from, so that when you hopefully come up with, you know, a few interesting elements about your town or your world, that now this character is more of a believable person in it. I don't think it's bad to have kind of archetypes. I think that's like a really helpful thing to use when you're writing. It's just giving it a little bit of spice to kind of make it a little more interesting, and that's where your personal experience can help inform that.
I mean, stereotypes are there for a reason, right?
I don't mean negative stereotypes, obviously. Like, I'm talking about like you know, a baker wears a hat or something, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you can always find people in your real life and just project some of their traits onto that person too.
Yeah, just to make it a little different, give it a little flavor.
Usually an asshole.
Yeah.
I got a question. So, we talk about backstories. What is your opinion on writing a backstory if you know the character is either going to end up dying, or do you even bother writing a
I can have fun
backstory
with
for
this.
people that, you know, they're gonna end up, because it's like some people don't like to read a story. They know the character, they know the ending already.
Well, we're horror writers, so
I
the characters
kill-
die. quite
I
often,
kill
yes.
almost everyone. And what's the fun in killing them if you don't care about them?
Yeah.
I want you to care about these people before I do horrible things to them. Like, I want it to fucking hurt.
But in my opinion, like, I'm writing a story where the character's already dead.
Oh.
So I'm writing a backstory.
So-
about it.
So why
there's-
would you care about them?
Yeah.
So you have to write backstory. You have to make that character someone that people will care about. Otherwise, why the hell would they read? And why would you write it?
Yeah, but some people just don't like reading a story about a character that's already dead.
They're like a ghost, is what you're saying?
I've read biographies before.
I actually do kind of want to follow up. Like, so what is sort of the premise? Like, how is this character dead? They're dead at the beginning of the story and then come back to life, or what's the premise here?
It's
So that we
like
can
it starts off with the conclusion of like maybe the end, and then it goes back to the beginning, something
Okay.
like that. In a way, you go backwards.
I think, yeah. I mean,
In that case, they should feel like a real character.
Yeah.
If they're going to be involved in the book, besides being a cadaver, that is something that the other characters need to deal with or figure out why they're dead.
Giving character to a cadaver could be fun too.
cadaver number 2 on CSY. Yeah. I think another example that you might see in current literature, there's a character on, some people are familiar with Critical Role. They have got their campaign 3 out right now. There's a character, Laudna, who is an undead character, who is back to life and traveling with this party and has magical powers and stuff. And if you just watch it for what it is, it seems like just kind of a fun character. But when you hear about that this character is actually introduced in campaign 1 as a victim of a mass hanging and is related to that, first campaign characters, and then you find out more about that depth of that character. All of a sudden, this kind of weird, creepy character that's just fun color now becomes something that's so much more juicy. And people care about that character more because, oh man, like there's some in-depth, dark stuff going on here. So even if the character's already dead, yeah, definitely you want some of that backstory, even if it doesn't necessarily get written in, all of it, it's going to inform how you play that character when you write them.
We were talking a little bit before about a hero's journey, and the hero needs to want something and something gets in their way. Every character in a book or story, movie, should want something. Even if it's something very simple, even if it's just, I want a peaceful life or something like that, or I don't want to be a part of this, like they all need to have something that drives their decision making. So if you don't have a character that needs pages and pages of stuff informing them, they're just kind of a side thing, they still need at least that much to know, to give them a driving force behind their decisions. Oh yeah, sure.
Okay, I got 10 minutes.
Okay.
So we got a couple more questions, and then we're going to have to go ahead and sign off here. Purple hat, Victor?
Me?
Yeah.
Let's see who's back. I'm going to throw a real twist in this. I have a question for all of you. During your creative process, both initially building backstory, whatever it is, how much thought do you give to how your book is going to be marketed?
A lot. For me.
0.
Especially because I'm doing something very niche in terms of, I'm not just writing children's books. My books, I market as being fantasy-themed books for developing readers. And so that could be anybody who's learning English as a second language, or somebody who's learning to read English later on in life due to cognitive delays. As an educator, one of the things that I ran into that informed how I'm writing is students that were disengaging from reading because they didn't want to read baby books. They're 9, 10, 12 years old and they're reading at a first grade level. They don't want Biscuit. They don't want, Winnie the Pooh. And so I wanted to provide them with some fantasy literature that is good for them, and socially acceptable for them to be carrying around and reading, that is also still appropriate for beginning readers that are 5 years old, 3 years old, and learning to read for the first time. And so marketing absolutely is very important to me. I want to make sure I'm hitting schools. I want to make sure that I'm hitting all these different notes. So it kind of, again, depends on what you're doing and your audience on how important that targeted marketing is. Sorry that I can't be more specific than that, but it really does just depends on your specific style of writing. And yeah, I'll let you guys kind of touch on that for you.
Yeah, I don't put a lot of thought into how the book's going to be marketed. There's, I mean, that's why, I work with indie presses and publishers, and they have kind of built-in audiences to them. And I put a lot of thought into myself as an artist, as a brand, only representing me, though, not necessarily how am I going to sell this particular book, because I might get really caught in the weeds of thinking, what do people want, and trying to write to please some amorphous idea of a person instead of writing something that I can be excited and proud of at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't know a first thing about fucking marketing. So, what I write is probably unpalatable to most people anyway, so I don't really care. And unlike him, I don't have a brand either. I'm just...
That's your brand.
Yeah.
I don't have a brand. It's his brand.
Whatever the fuck I am. So...
It seems like for some people, it's clearly right in line with it, and for some people it's more balanced. And then obviously...
Yeah, and I mean, if you're being traditionally published, then they're going to deal with all the marketing, right?
Yeah,
but
hopefully.
In terms of indie published, I'm independent,
Yeah.
all independent. It's kind of where you're going with it, and it can be a lot more flexible.
Yeah, you don't get much marketing from small presses, so...
Yeah.
I mean, if you're doing a genre, that's half your marketing there. If
Yeah.
people know what genre your book is, then they know kind of at least a little bit what they're getting.
And then you also know what circles to go into,
Yeah,
right?
to
You
pay
know, like
attention.
what Facebook groups to join to say, hey, here's my book, or what Twitter feeds or book talk feeds, or those types of things.
Unless
to
you
jump
feel
in on.
dirty doing self-promotion, which is my problem, I can't do it. I feel slimy the moment I try and do any kind of self-promotion, so...
Yeah, I feel very very split personality-wise, where it's like I come into some things as an author, and I come into some things as first fantasy books, and it's just depending on what role I'm playing, I've got to turn that switch and become a different person for that. Yeah.
This is kind of going off of that. After you've been writing on a book for months or so, how do you kind of separate yourself from your writing mind and think like the audience reading this for the first time? How do you read it like a first reader would read it? Did you have it?
I rely on beta readers for that. I sure as hell can't do it.
I was gonna say you finish a project and you send it off to either if you hire your own editor to do it, or if you have a publisher you work with, you send it to them, and you will eventually get back from that person edits and thoughts on it, and hopefully there'll have been a little bit of time in between that you are no longer so enmeshed in what you have written that you kind of have a nice fresh perspective and you're willing to take some constructive feedback from other people and give it more of an objective appraisal.
I work on another project. I find another project and work on it for 2 weeks.
That's
and then I come back and just am like, okay, what did I mess up? And I
give
read
it a break for a while and then come back with a fresh mind, basically.
I like getting a third-party perspective on it first.
Yeah.
Whether it's editing or beta readers, anyone else.
We are starting to run low on time.
Yeah, we still have a lot of questions too.
Okay, yeah, I know we got a lot of time, but we got a lot of questions. We're low on time.
The longer, yeah, you had it right up for a while.
Yeah.
My question was, you said you write a lot of diverse characters. How do you go about writing that diverse character without having that be their main focus or their main theme?
Because people can't be broken down to a single characteristic.
Yeah,
I mean,
I get that. I'm just being for example, if someone has an eye patch, how would you go about writing about that without that being oh, this guy's so cool because he has an eye patch?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
somebody sneaks up on him on the side that has the eye patch.
I found that kind of a similar thing with acting and accents, right? The harder you try, the less authentic it becomes.
Yeah.
And so the same thing with characters. If you aren't sitting there focusing on the eye patch all the time, and all of a sudden it's, yeah, they got an eye patch. And they are a human being existing in this world with their own thoughts, their own experiences, then those things drive the character rather than, oh, they have an eye patch. You know, so I think that's really that same thing of people who are reading the book who may identify with that character, having limited vision, having an eye patch, they are just happy that this character exists in the world and is operating as a hero or as these other things as a person and not identified by their disability or you know, their race or their gender or their, you know, sexual identity. Those things are part of them, but they are not them. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, do you guys because you talked about having a beta reader, do you guys let other people directly edit your works at all at any point, or no?
Our editors will make suggestions and send them back to us.
Yeah, you work with an editor, they're not. I've never been in a situation where the editor said, we're doing this and you don't have a say in the matter. Yeah.
I can veto anything
Intellectual property.
Yeah. Usually a good editor has good suggestions though, so you want to take their suggestions, not fight back against it. But sometimes they might not understand where you were coming from.
And then you have to justify it.
Yeah.
So before we get out of here, how can our audience find you all?
Oh, like on social medias and stuff? Or?
Social medias, you got a website, how are they going to find you? How can they support your work?
Can I say this, first of all? I'm really happy you guys have been very, you have a lot of questions.
You're engaged.
You drove this entire panel, and we are all in the same area, an author's alley over there, and if anyone wants to continue talking about any of this, I don't think any of us would be opposed to you coming over and just continuing these conversations. So if there was something you did want to say or talk about and pick our minds with, please come over there.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all those places, you just type in my name. It's Danger Slater. Probably the only one.
Yeah.
And I can be looked up by my name as well, or just look up Meltdown Messiah, all one fucking word. Meltdown Messiah.
And you can find me as First Fantasy Books on pretty much all the major social media, as well as firstfantasybooks.com, and also here in Author Alley.
Yep.
Cool. So, all right. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.